Hope you had a good chance to discuss some questions. Hope they were helpful for you and that they might lead to other important conversations you might have later. I want to start this session again with a question. How many people are familiar with divorce rates for couples that use natural family planning? Anyone ever heard statistics about this? One person has heard some. What statistics have you heard? Very low divorce rates. It varies from study to study, as these things do. Typically, couples using natural family planning have a divorce rate of less than 5%. And people might wonder why that might be, and you might have different sort of immediate guesses, right? One of the immediate guesses that people have is, well, it's religious people. Religious people use it, and so they won't get divorced because the church says divorce is bad. Actually, religious people don't have significantly lower divorce rates than the rest of the population. They are slightly lower than the rest of the population. And it seems that the reason they are slightly lower than the rest of the population is because they include certain subgroups that engage in certain practices. Because what determines success or failure of marriages is not typically beliefs. Believing that marriage is important doesn't divorce-proof your marriage. Believing that God thinks divorce is a sin does not divorce-proof your marriage. Doing concrete, specific things together that help you be a better partner to one another is what helps divorce-proof a marriage. So two really obvious categories that include a lot of religious people. Couples that practice natural family planning have a divorce rate of under 5%, typically. Couples that pray together, that's a concrete, specific practice that you do together, have dramatically low divorce rates as well. And those are enough to give religious people slight advantages over the rest of the population in terms of divorce. But it's not like the divorce rate is just all the non-religious people getting divorced and all the religious people staying happily married. You probably know from your own lives that that's just not the case, right? Okay, so if what protects marriages from breakdown and divorce are concrete practices, things that we actually do together, and if natural family planning is one of those practices, what I want to look at in this second talk is, how does it function? What does it actually look like in our life together? And how do the things that it does to us as a couple make us more likely to succeed in our marriage, right? So it's a practice. Now, one of the things that people will say is, natural family planning, if it's just as effective, for example, as the pill or a condom for avoiding pregnancy, then there's no difference, right? Why does the church care whether you use this method or that method if what you're trying to do is achieve the same kind of goal, and if it's roughly as effective at doing that goal, what's the difference? Why bother, right? Of course, notice that whoever is asking that question is not asking it in order to dismiss using the pill or the condom, right? You don't say, oh, since the pill and the condom have the same effective rate, why not just use natural family planning? If they're the same, the argument should work in both directions. But notice that people don't use it to work in both directions. Because in the back of our minds, anyone asking that question already knows that natural family planning is different. That's why we don't want to do it. It scares us. It looks really hard. These other things look easier and simpler. And so we say, well, what's the difference? And we know already that there's a difference, or we wouldn't be asking the question, right? The difference between natural family planning and things like pills or inserts or shots or condoms is precisely that natural family planning forces us to do certain kinds of work in our relationship that are really good for relationships. Before we get to that, let's look at some basics. Like I said, we're not doing a biology lesson, but just a really basic introduction. how does it work? It works by monitoring a woman's symptoms of fertility. That's why in many contexts, it's not called natural family planning. If you went to your naturopathic doctor, they would, and you say you had problems with your current birth control or whatever, and you talk to them about it, they would almost certainly recommend what Catholics tend to call natural family planning, but they would call it fertility awareness. So if you've seen, sometimes you can go get a book from the public library on fertility awareness. I like that term sometimes even better than natural family planning, because fertility awareness really labels exactly what's going on. We're becoming aware of whether a woman is fertile or not, and then we make our choices about our intimacy based on that information. This means it is equally useful for achieving pregnancy or avoiding pregnancy. And in fact, many people will use it to achieve pregnancy. It's the very first thing you should do if you're having difficulty conceiving, is you find out how to learn when the wife is the most fertile, and you engage at those times, right? That seems obvious. Before you get any surgeries, before you introduce any medications, just try to map this out and engage when you're most likely to get pregnant. Something that's really key about this method is it does not change the human body at all, and it does not change the act of sex at all. It doesn't interfere at all with, particularly with what is going on with a woman's biology. Now, this is a reason that many women find this method very helpful and even freeing. Women who start to pay attention to when they're fertile or not start to know themselves and understand themselves in a way very often that they did not understand themselves before. And husbands who are paying attention to a woman's fertility cycle start to recognize and know things about their wife that they didn't recognize and know before. And knowing and recognizing these things gives both husband and wives tools for engaging with one another, not just sexually, but in the day-to-day, right? If you know that someone is going to be particularly tired and maybe sick around a certain time of month, you prepare for that and you make space for each other with that. If you know someone is going to be more energetic, more amorous, more engaged in certain kinds of ideas at certain times of month, you can plan and arrange your lives around that. If there's a time where there needs to be some downtime where it's kind of chill out and release, right? Now, women who've been paying attention know where all these line up, and some of the guys will know as well. That's worth talking about. When you live with another person, knowing what they're going through and how they feel in their bodies is a great thing to know about, right? I want to share a story with you from our own marriage related to this. We were having trouble with natural family planning, and I think sometimes presentations on this are a little bit too sunshine and lollipops, and they don't acknowledge that for some people, tracking fertility is tricky. For some people, it's tricky at certain times, right? After a baby, it's tricky. During certain health issues, it can be tricky. And for some people, it's just more tricky than for others, because people are different, right? And for us, it's tricky. And so we were seeing a specialist. By the way, it was free. Very often in natural family planning circles, the people are so committed that they don't charge you money to help you. We were seeing a specialist for free, and she said, this chart, because you chart, your pattern over the month, this is a weird chart. I think you need to go get tested for these vitamin and mineral deficiencies, because sometimes when this happens, someone's got a deficiency in vitamin or mineral. So we went to our doctor and asked for these tests. And, well, why do you want these tests? Well, our natural family planning practitioner said maybe we should, check in on the vitamin D or whatever it was. And our doctor was very suspicious, and she said, I usually do evidence-based medicine. But we prevailed upon her, and she got Flannery the test. Well, sure enough, I think it was vitamin D, was bottomed right out, completely bottomed out. And so she got supplements, and lo and behold, her cycle was healthier, right? This is one of the things that can happen is women who get to know their own bodies better are not only better equipped to live in relationship with the other people in their lives, but they're also better equipped to deal with health issues that may be impacting them. And often enough, if we're on a hormonal form of contraception, those things get masked so that we can't even see them, right? Because natural family planning does not alter the woman's body or the man's body, but particularly the woman's body, and because it does not alter the sexual act at all, everything still works exactly the same as it works, untouched. It engages us at a different level than artificial contraception does, because it means we have to decide together whether tonight is a night we will be intimate or if it's going to have to wait for another night. We have information now that we can use to make a decision, and we can make that decision together, and we can decide if we're fertile and we want a baby, carry on. If we're fertile and we don't want a baby, we'll watch a movie. If we're infertile, do whatever you want, right? But you can decide. Or, in fact, if you're like, there's some borderline periods where you're like, probably infertile, but not a guarantee. Are we willing to run a yellow light tonight? But you make the decision. We'll talk more about yellow lights later. We make the decision together in freedom, right? So one of the things that's really key is how it engages us in our freedom. And then the thing that follows from that is then it engages our discipline. Because if we have made a decision in freedom together about when and if we are having sex, times are going to arise when we're going to question that decision. And we're going to wonder, maybe we actually want to be having sex when we kind of decided in the conversation a few weeks ago that that was a no-go. And so then we engage our discipline, right? And we say, is this what we really want? And if it is what we want, then we work together to do what we decided to do. Now, I don't know how many of you have been in an orchestra or a band or a sports team or anything like that where you concretely engage in disciplines with other people over a long period of time. When we do that, notice what happens to those relationships. Right? Not that they're perfect, not that we never fight with our bandmates or our teammates, but think about a time when you were on a roll, when your band or your choir or your baseball team or whatever you were doing, everyone was working together, everyone had the same vision, and you were meeting goals together and you were doing great, right? What does that do to those relationships, right? Same thing applies to marriage. When we engage in disciplined practices together and we learn to trust each other and to work together and to support one another in our decisions, that has benefits that transfer across the whole relationship. Not just sex, but everything, right? You can apply the same thing to housework, right? If you had disciplined practices where you work together about housework, your family life and your marriage would be better. So even more about sex, right? So it engages our freedom and it engages our discipline. And those lead to good outcomes for relationship. Contraception, artificial contraception, works in a few different ways. It can work by altering the sex act itself. So if you think of what we call barrier methods, right, it actually stops the sperm from the potential of meeting the egg because the sperm isn't allowed in, right? We block the act. That's one way they can work. So we can change the act of sex itself. Second thing we can do is we can change the way a woman's body works, right? So we can alter her hormones, we can alter her body chemistry so that her body does not work the way a healthy woman's body works. And a third way that they can work, some methods work this way. An IUD, for example, always works this way. Hormonal methods might work this way as a backup feature, and we don't know how often this happens. But they can work by making it difficult or impossible for an embryo which was conceived. So the sperm and the egg have met, and this happens, because people actually do get pregnant on the pill, right? So sometimes it's called breakthrough ovulation. An egg is released, it meets the sperm, a child is conceived, but then it needs to travel down the fallopian tube and implant in the uterine wall. And an intrauterine device is designed to stop it from implanting, and so the child passes from your body and you never know. Sometimes hormonal methods will function like that, but we don't know. There's big debates about how often this happens. But if there is breakthrough ovulation, sometimes you will never find out that you conceived a child because the uterus was inhospitable, right? For a lot of people, that in itself is a reason enough to not do it. That's a big deal. But notice that no matter what is going on, contraception is altering something. It's altering sex. It's altering our bodies. It may even be leading to a child that we never knew happened, right? Natural family planning asks us to alter our lifestyles in order to accommodate what is true about our bodies and what is true about sex. Artificial contraception says, leave your lifestyle the same, we will try to change sex and we will try to change your bodies. Many people who use natural family planning, and especially women, feel that this altering, particularly of the woman's body, is a way of pathologizing and stigmatizing how a healthy woman's body works and functions. We have enough problems in general in society with certain attitudes towards women. We may not have ever considered what it means to take very often a young girl, people in this room, right? You're 13, you're 14 years old, you've got cramps, you've got acne, you go into the doctor, are you on the pill? No? Okay, let's get you on the pill, right? Usually, that's just a Band-Aid. It doesn't actually address what's actually going on, and so it doesn't deal with the deeper symptoms that's happening. But we're telling young women from the time they start menstruating that there's something wrong with having a healthy, functioning female reproductive system, right? And we don't realize how that might be impacting. I was playing with my 7-year-old daughter on the couch today, and I just thought, I just don't want her to grow up thinking that there's something wrong with her because she has a healthy, functioning reproductive system, right? And as men, to honor our wives and not treat their healthy, functioning reproductive system as if it means that there's something wrong with them. One of the things that feminists will argue, some feminists who are against artificial contraception, is artificial contraception tries to turn a woman's body into a man's body because it turns a woman into a kind of person who can have sex without having to worry about a baby. And is that empowering to women? Or does that say the thing that makes you the only half of the species that can do this thing, right? We can't do it. That thing that only you can do is somehow a problem, right? Do we unintentionally maybe give women this impression that there's something wrong with them when they're healthy and we put them on drugs to make them less healthy? If you showed up at a doctor's office with the same symptoms that hormonal contraceptives cause in many women, if you said weight gain, irritability, decreased libido, doc, what's wrong with me? And the doctor, takes, blood and urine samples, and they look at your hormone levels and say, your hormones are all out of whack. No wonder you're expressing these symptoms. We need to put you on other hormones to get you back into it, right? This is the only example I can think of in medicine where we give a healthy functioning body hormones that turn it into an unhealthy, less functioning body. And what does that do in our attitude towards women? There was a great article. Do you guys read The Onion? The Onion is a satirical website. There's a great article in The Onion titled, Woman Gives Up Contraceptive for Different Contraceptives with Other Bad Side Effects. Now, again, if this room is not statistically really exceptional, if this is a normal statistical room, there are women in this room who have given up, who have started on hormonal contraceptives and stopped them or switched them to another one because they didn't like the side effects. Something like 60% of women who end up switching because they don't like the side effects. When you read the comments underneath this story, all the comments were from women saying, this is my story. I started on this one, I hated it, so I switched, I went to this other one, I hated it. This one gave me headaches, this one made me feel like this one, right? I never wanted to look at my husband, etc., right? All these kinds of things. Around the same time that came out, that's satirical news. A real news story broke in the mainstream media. They finally, after decades, they've developed a contraceptive shot for men. So men can get a shot that will eliminate, decrease, whatever, their sperm count to the point where very unlikely that you get pregnant. Now, this got really interesting because they talked to the men who were in the trial, right, who had got this shot. And do you know what the men said about their bodies? I was grouchy and irritable, and I didn't feel at home in my own body, and I didn't feel right, right? This was awkward. I don't want to be on this stuff. And all of the news coverage made fun of these men. They said, suck it up, boys. Women have been doing this for 40 years. Your turn now, right? Nobody said, hey, maybe neither men nor women need to be pumped full of hormones that aren't healthy for them. That wasn't even an option that was listed or available through the mainstream media. It was just your turn to go through having a body that is not as healthy as it could be because we're going to alter your hormones, right? Now, when a narrative is so common that the mainstream media cannot even imagine an alternative, right? We must be putting hormones in at least somebody's body to alter their fertility. There is a very good chance that somebody's making a lot of money. And we might not have considered that when we were a 14-year-old girl and we went into the doctor's office and they said, oh, acne, oh, cramps, oh, whatever, we need to get you on the pill, that doctor had been, approached by someone working for a pharmaceutical company who was promoting a product. But that's actually how these things work. Pharmaceutical companies want to sell their products. And if they can medicalize being a healthy, fertile woman from the time you're 13 or 14 years old, and they've got a customer for life, they're going to make a lot of money. And if we're going to develop something similar for men, you can bet that they're looking to make a lot of money. When no one even thinks to ask, are there other alternatives that don't involve making people sick? Usually there are other interests, and it's worth thinking about what those interests are, and do they have my best interest in mind, or am I a dollar sign, right? This is one reason why more and more people are pursuing natural methods of family planning, even if they have no connection at all with religion or the Catholic Church. Women feel more empowered when their bodies are treated as normal and healthy. They don't feel like they're being commercialized. All of us know that we just like natural things, right? If we had the money, the reason I don't get, organic bananas instead of normal bananas is because organic bananas are really expensive. But almost everyone here would buy the organic food if it cost the same. What if the organic food was cheaper? Right? People are into natural things. Environmentalists are interested in this. In our major cities, there is so much synthetic hormone going through our water treatment plants from hormonal contraceptives that fish that are downstream from these treatment plants are changing gender. Male fish are becoming feminized because of the amount of synthetic hormone in the water. If we were to find out that those synthetic hormones that we're taking voluntarily, that we're paying money for, were in our milk or in our beef or in our eggs, there would be a public outcry. We wouldn't want to be anywhere near them, but we pay companies to put them in our bodies anyways. So there's lots of people who are moving in other directions, not because of religious reasons at all. Now, the thing is that the natural means in this case actually are much more affordable. Natural family planning might cost a little bit in terms of some training. It might cost a little bit in terms of investing in some equipment. So you might get a thermometer. We actually have a sensor that plugs into an iPad. And we use an app to track my wife's fertility. And that's been really handy for us. So there's an initial upfront cost for the software and for the equipment. But once you've got it, it's basically free. Which is one of the reasons why maybe there's not that many people out there pushing it, right? Because there's not as much money to be made on it. Do any of you guys have any friends that go to CrossFit? Nodding. And you should be going to CrossFit too, right? This is how CrossFit works, right? They put pictures of themselves on Facebook, gasping in a puddle of their own sweat, and they want you to join them next week, right? People, myself included, who practice natural family planning are a little bit like CrossFitters because we're doing something that's hard. But we're all telling all y'all, you guys got to try this, man. Like, this will change your approach. This is good. And you look at us like, panting on the floor. You think, that's not for me, right? Here's a guy shows up to tell you about family planning, got 6 kids. What? Bring someone with 0 kids to tell me about family planning. This doesn't make any sense. Right? Why do people like me with 6 kids who engage in this practice want to show up and talk to people like you to encourage you to consider the same kind of thing? Why do CrossFitters want other people to go to CrossFit? They're doing something that's really hard, and they've noticed that it's changed their life for the better, and they want to share that with people. So what kinds of things happen in the lives of people who use natural family planning that turn them into people who want to come here and give a talk to convince you to do the same kind of thing, right? Natural family planning makes us do hard things, and that's what's good about it, because marriage is hard. I mean, marriage is really, really, really hard. Lots of people, well-intentioned people, good people, can't make it work. You all know people like that. You know good people who couldn't make a marriage work because marriage is hard. And none of us is going to have a successful marriage. I don't care, take your pick, family planning at this point. None of us is going to have a successful marriage if we're not interested in hard work. I will make you that 100% guarantee. And that's, by the way, another reason I'm so honored to be here, because you showing up is an indication that you're willing to put in the work. And that increases your odds, right? Marriage is really hard, and you're going to have to put in the work, or it's not going to work out for you. NFP creates a context for certain kinds of work that are very beneficial for a relationship. I talked earlier about how NFP engages our discipline, right? And I said when you do disciplined practices together, you grow together. Now let's apply that a little more specifically to NFP and sex. There are times in life where you can't have sex. People get sick. People travel on business. People have twins and haven't slept in 3 weeks, and so good luck. Right? There are all kinds of reasons in your relationship where you would like to be having sex and you're not going to be having sex because life happens, right? What do you do in those contexts? Do you mope? Do you complain? Do you whine? Do you feel bad for yourself? Do you accuse your spouse of whatever it is that's going on? It wouldn't be surprising. I've done some of those things. Because it's hard. It's hard to expect intimacy and then find out you can't, right? And growing through that is difficult. And we all come from a culture where we're given the impression that we actually kind of need sex to stay sane. Like if you don't get a certain number of orgasms, you're going to lose your mind, right? We often, I don't know, Father, is Father still here? Where's Father? Father has left the room. He knew this joke was coming, right? Priests hear this all the time, right? Well, we have a seminarian. People probably ask you, right? How are you going to live? You can't survive without sex. You're going to go crazy, right? Lots of people aren't having sex for a lot of the time, actually. And that includes married people, and sometimes for very good reasons. And you need to be able to live in a space where sex is not available and still be charitable and open and even physically intimate with one another, right? If you can't have sex and you're like, oh, okay, I guess we better not touch each other because that might lead to something that, right? No, like when people are lonely, hold one another, right? Give one another a massage. Do something. Don't introduce more space into your relationship around this, or it can become a poison. But if you use it as an opportunity to support one another in a difficult time, that will bring you closer and closer together, right? There's going to be times where you can't have sex. Now, what do we know in general about people who try to fulfill every desire every time it raises its head? I want cheesies. I'm going to scroll Facebook, right? People who fulfill every desire as soon as it raises its head are not happy, healthy people. By the way, that includes most of us here. Not in every situation, but all of us have our weak spots. Some of us, it's going to be social media. Actually, for a lot of us, the statistics are going to tell us it's going to be social media. For some of us, it's going to be food. For some of us, it's going to be drink. For some of us, it's going to be videos on the internet. There's going to be different things for different ones of us. There are things that we desire that we're not good at saying no to, and it doesn't make us happy when we say yes. It doesn't, and we know it, and we wish we could stop, right? People who say yes to every desire whenever it raises its head are not happy, healthy people, and they're not free people, but they are great consumers, aren't they? We live in a culture that starts to break down our self-control as soon as we can watch an advertisement. We're turned into people who are supposed to see something and need it and act on it, right? That's how advertising works. It's trying to break down your self-control so that you can't tell the difference between a want and a need, right? And how does that shape up in our sex lives? If we can't distinguish between wants and needs, and if we need to have something satisfied as soon as it raises its head in our relationship. All of us are going to struggle with that to some degree because we live in a culture that doesn't give us any options, right? If we make a deliberate choice to work with our spouse around discipline about sex, we are giving ourselves tools to be happier. What happens in a relationship between a man and a woman where a man does not need to be satisfied as soon as the possibility arises? A woman feels less used. A woman feels like when a man approaches, it's an act of love and you're not just a cheeseburger and he saw an advertisement, right? Women feel much more cherished and understood if they know that when they're approached by their husband, it's not simply a response to a stimulus, right? If a husband is free in that respect, his wife can feel more loved. What happens to a husband when a wife is more disciplined? One of the things that happens, and we don't want to state that this is always the case, but it is often the case that a man has more expectations for more frequent sex than the wife. Not always, often the case. Very often, a wife doesn't feel like it. A husband doesn't take much, right? Like a minute or two of a little work on him. If he wasn't in the mood, you can get him in the mood, right? Usually that's how it works. If she's not in the mood, she's thinking about something at work, something's going on, right? It takes a lot more work to get her to where you want to be, right? By the way, that work is really good for you, husbands. But from the woman's point of view, if she says to herself, you know what, I don't really feel like it, and I've got all this other stuff going on, but I'm going to discipline myself now by putting those other things on the shelf and attending to my husband, right? Sometimes the discipline isn't, I'm not going to do it. Sometimes the discipline is, I'm going to work at getting into it even though I don't really feel like it at the moment. The discipline could go in, and they typically overlap, male and female, but not always, right? It can go the other way. And when we are more disciplined in those ways around our sex lives get better. And both of us feel more cared for and attended to by the other person, and then our whole relationship gets better, right? So the discipline of natural family planning, of introducing the possibility that there are times when we would feel like being together, and because we've made a decision in freedom that this isn't for us right now, and we're going to do something else together, that builds discipline that makes us better lovers and better spouses, right? So that's one concrete thing. A second concrete thing that natural family planning does in a relationship. Here's a story from my own marriage. We had Toby and Oscar, and then we had a long space before we had Daisy. So I was in grad school. We lived in a tiny little cockroach-ridden apartment. Flannery was the main income earner, and we didn't have a lot of space, and we didn't have a lot of money. And we thought, well, we'll get closer to the end of grad school, and then we'll reconsider. And at a certain point, this meant that for a blessed year or two, we had 2 kids out of diapers. We were done teething. They could go off and play on their own without us. We didn't have to monitor them at every minute, right? This is a glorious time when this happens. We were sitting there having tea around the dining room table, and the brothers had gone off to play in their room, and it was quiet. And we were like, what is this? It's like, it would be really easy at that point to never have another child. It would be really easy to just be like, no, we're done diapers. We're done being up in the night. We're done teething. We are done all that stuff. And we can just coast now. And if we had been using a hormonal contraceptive, it would have been very easy to just stay on it indefinitely and never ask the question. If you use natural family planning and you have 2 kids and it's been 3 years and things look pretty good and you kind of like this sleeping through the night business, but you want to be together tonight, and you know that if you're together tonight, that might mean a baby. You got to have a conversation. One of the reasons, if natural family planning works so well, why do people usually have so many kids? Here's the number one reason why they have so many kids: because they have the conversation. They get to a point in their relationship where they want to be together, but they know that getting together tonight means a baby, and they say, a baby. We haven't thought about that in a while. What does that mean? Do we want a baby? We didn't think we wanted a baby. Why did we think that? And do you know what's connected to the question of whether or not we should have a baby? Everything. Every single thing. How come we didn't want a baby? Well, you were really stressed out at work. Okay, what's going on at work? What's your situation now? How come we didn't want a baby? Because you're the only income earner and we couldn't afford for you to not be at work. Okay, is that still the situation? What are our finances like? How come we didn't want a baby? Because we hadn't slept in 2 years. Okay, how's our sleep patterns now? How come we didn't want a baby? Because your back problems were unmanageable and we were spending a ton of time and money on chiropractors and massage and exercise therapists. Okay, what's going on with your back, right? How come we didn't want a baby? Because your parents were driving us crazy. Are they still? Where is that at, right? You end up talking about every single thing in your life, from health to relationships to finances. How come we didn't want a baby? Because our other kid actually had a ton of needs at that point in their life. They were still undiagnosed with that thing. We didn't have the medicine that's helping them now. We didn't know where that was at. But now we've got a diagnosis and they're functioning well and everything's good, right? When you talk about a baby, you got to talk about everything. Do you know what happens to couples that talk about every single thing in their marriage with some regularity? They don't get divorced. It's actually not a hard line to draw. If you have a practice that forces you to talk about every hard thing in your marriage, whenever your bodies want to be together, which is usually at least once a month, you got to deal with all your stuff, and that's really good for marriages. And when marriages don't work, you know what happens? People slowly drift. We haven't talked about this for a long time. I didn't feel understood on this question, and we just never went back and talked about it. And we spent more time apart, and we never got there. And pretty soon, there was just no getting back, because we hadn't dealt with this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing and this, and it all piled up, and it got to be too much, right? Natural family planning forces you to have conversations about everything. Even if in your life the right choice is 2 children, and you have a conversation every few months for 10 years and you realize, we're still not in a position to have a baby, you still have those conversations all the time. Now, my bet says that eventually, odds are, you'll be more open to a baby than you might have been if you weren't using natural family planning, because you ask the question. And natural family planning changes the way we think about babies. And this is my last point, right? If we have thought about babies as commodities, as we need to collect the whole set, we'll get the boy and the girl, and then, we'll wrap it up. We might not have noticed the way that our culture sometimes talks about babies. Now, if you show up at Superstore with 4 children, people say things to you. I was preparing this talk. I had this set of notes with me at gymnastics yesterday. I took Daisy to gymnastics, and I'm looking over my notes, preparing my talk for today. And there's a lady I know from church who's come there, and I didn't know she would be there. Haven't seen her there before. She was there to see her granddaughter, who's in the same class as Daisy. And we hadn't seen each other in a year or two. And she says, "How are the twins?" So, they're doing good. They're 2.5 now, that kind of thing. She says, "Any more?" And that would be at least number 7, right? And I said, "Well, not that I know of. I haven't checked in the last couple of weeks, but no more kids." And a lady behind me who I've never met, doesn't know me from a hole in the ground, but who was there last week when I was there with 5 of the 6 kids. She might not even know I have 6. She might think I only have 5. She says, "That's enough." Now, she might have been being a jerk, but my gut tells me she was actually just trying to be funny and friendly. But isn't that kind of weird that we live in a culture where saying something like that to a person you don't even know might be an attempt to be funny and friendly? I used to walk Toby and Oscar on a double stroller when we lived in Toronto, and people would stop me on the street and say, "They're lovely, but that's enough now." Now, don't get me wrong, we also get lots of beautiful comments. What beautiful children, what a lovely family. We do get lots of that. It's not all bad. But it is remarkable what attitude people will bring to children, and they don't even consider that they're doing something awkward or inappropriate. Here's a situation that was really strange. We went to a party when we were in Toronto and the kids were little. I think we had 3 at the time. Maybe we only had 2. And the party was, my wife's side of the family, they were old. We were the young couple from Saskatchewan. They were all older professionals in their 40s or 50s, and these were high-powered people. These were corporate lawyers and journalists who worked for the CBC and movers and shakers in Toronto society. And you have 1 or 2 children in that context, right? That's just how it goes. But we were there, and we were a little weird, and we were there just because we were related. And there was another couple that was there that didn't run in those circles, but they were the neighbors. They lived next door, and they got along well with the neighbors, so they got invited because they're the neighbors, but they didn't run in the same circles, right? Now, the neighbors had 3 children. And the neighbors came in with these 3 children, And they're getting boots and jackets, and right, because it's winter, and it's chaos in the front porch, And at that stage, we overhear people talking, and here's something you'll hear people say, and you might not even notice how weird it is until you double check. In front of children, people will say, "I'm so glad we only had one." It's not abnormal for people to say something like that in our culture. What does that sound like if you're the second or third child? What does it sound like if you're the first child? I'm glad there aren't more of you. When you go to the hospital after you have a baby, they give you this booklet, Contraceptive Methods, right? So after we had the twins, they gave us this booklet. I flipped through it. It's terrifying, because it lists some of the drawbacks. Risk of uterine perforation, irregular bleeding, headaches, nausea, decreased bone density, blood clots, by the way, all over, blood clots, for many different hormonal methods, right? And I looked at this and I thought, what on earth? And so I grabbed a pen and I wrote on it. I said, "Have you seen our children?" Of course, it would be good if there were more of them. They're awesome. Right? What do you say to children if you? Not that there's never a good reason to refrain for some time, because life is hard and people get in bad situations. But children are good, and it's painful that we live in a culture that uses language in front of children that makes it sound like they might not be good. My mom was a elementary school teacher, not in a Catholic system. She's in a public system. We lived in small town Saskatchewan where there was no Catholic school. And at the time in the curriculum, there's a health project in grade 4 where you study a certain disease, right? So what are the symptoms of this disease? What are the causes of this disease? What are the treatments of this disease? All that kind of thing, right? And so one little guy had done his project, and one of the treatments for one of the diseases was birth control pill. Now, it shouldn't have been called a birth control pill because it wasn't being used for birth control. There may be legitimate times where people need to adjust their hormones because they're out of whack, and so they need to take hormone pills to get their hormones in a healthy situation, right? So it shouldn't have been called birth control, but anyways, it was called birth control. And he didn't know what that was. So he went up to my mom, the teacher. So he got this grade 4 kid, goes up and says, "What's a birth control pill?" My mom's like, okay. So she's not in a Catholic school, right? So there's certain things she can and can't say. And she says, it's a medicine that a lady will take so that she doesn't have a baby. And the little guy said, "Why would anyone want to do that?" It was obvious to him that kids were good, right? It had never occurred to him that someone wouldn't want someone like him. God bless him, he probably came from a home where he felt loved, But what does it say to children when we talk about children as things we'd rather not have, and when we do that in front of them? So we're very careful in our house whenever a pregnancy happens. I'm sure it's the same in your house. There are some pregnancies that happen, in the extended family or among the friends or whatever, where, hey, this couple's just got married and they're starting a family, and isn't that exciting? That's great. We just had one in our circle of friends where there's a couple who was struggling with infertility for years, and they got pregnant. Hooray, awesome, that's great. And then there are other situations where the pregnancy was not expected, and the situation is not ideal, right? We might call that a crisis pregnancy. We are very careful when we talk in front of our children, when they know that crisis pregnancies happen, right? By the way, if you've ever read the Bible, it's actually kind of the central story. Jesus was a crisis pregnancy, right? This is a teenage girl. You know the story? She goes off to see her cousin Elizabeth in the hill country? Most of us in this room won't remember, but until about 50 years, any unwed girl that got pregnant left town and went and stayed with relatives far away. This is a crisis pregnancy, right? Even in a crisis pregnancy, we are very careful in front of our children when we talk about babies. We never use the word accident. And I know people who've shared with me that, and it almost certainly includes some of us here, that they were told by their parents or by someone else that they were in an accident. And that can be a deeply wounding thing for someone to hear that. We never use that language. We say a baby is always good. Are there circumstances that aren't good? Absolutely there are. Are there even actions that are really bad? You betcha. There's rape, there's adultery, there's all kinds of things that are bad actions that might make a baby, right? But a baby is always good. I had a friend growing up. She's quite a bit older than me. She's actually my parents' friend. She had a line she used. She said, when God needs to fix something, God sends a baby. Now, that's an easy thing to say for some people, but she earned it because she was a teenage mom. She got herself in some trouble when she was 14 or 15 years old, and she started her family very young. And when I first heard her say this, she was talking about a grandchild that was on the way now that was a bit of a surprise. And her attitude towards this grandchild is not, this is an accident, we got to do something to cover this up, we got to get rid of it. God is acting here. When God needs to fix something, God is going to send a baby. Now, if you've read the Bible, this isn't just a nice pious idea that some lady has come up with to cover her own tracks. This is actually the Christmas story, right? When God had a problem, when the world was falling apart, God didn't come as an army commander, which if you read the Gospels, everyone's expecting, like, Jesus, when are you going to lead the army and throw off the Romans? No. When God came to fix the world, God came as a baby, right? And so if we can take on those lenses, and if natural family planning gives us more and more experience where we consider that children are a natural and good outcome of our intimacy, and that they're never an accident, even if they're a challenge, and even if they were a surprise, they're not a sign that something wasn't working. They're a sign that your love has created something, and God has used your love to create something, and God has a purpose for that. And if we can have that attitude when we approach children, it's going to be a blessing to us. It's going to be a blessing to our kids. And so I'll leave you with that.
you.